Welcome back, everybody, to Full Crew. We have episode 80 focusing on defense tech. I am your host, Michelle Duquette. I am the Autonomy Global Operations Ambassador, and I am super excited about today's show. We've got three different topics that we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about the funding around current day autonomous warfare and the pros and cons of that. We're going to talk about collision avoidance and from a technical perspective, what is it that we need to be looking for in order to avoid the experiences of the recent past. And finally, we have an article that is talking more about the posturing and positioning of the United States. So before we jump into it, I want to kind of make mention that we have sponsors always for Full Crew, and we need to call them out. So we're always powered by LiveView. Thank you, Carahsoft, Cape May County, Victus Technologies, and Echodyne for sponsoring this week's episode of Full Crew. So let's turn to the spectacular subject matter experts that we have on panel today. And let's go around real quick, 30 seconds each. Tell us who you are, what you do. And we'll start with Mike.
All right. Thank you, Michelle, for inviting me to today's session. A little bit about me. I'm the Vice President at Carahsoft for Government Programs and Strategy, which also includes being the Department of War Executive at Carahsoft. I spent about 32 years in uniform and a little time as a senior government civilian. Going back to 1989, I've been involved in technology modernization and engineering. I've spent the past 15 years involved in supply chain engineering at every level. And again, thanks for inviting me here today. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Back over to you.
All right. Thank you so much. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. Tom, let's go over to you.
Hi, good morning, Michelle. Tom Furey. I'm the CEO of Sagetch Avionics. We're a small business that make identify friend or foe, IFF, collision avoidance transponder systems. I started my career as flying in the Navy, naval flight officer on the A6 Intruder aircraft. So taxpayer dollars paid me to fly off boats and blow up other people's stuff. A career in industry and kind of full circle coming back to defense technology where I used to use it. Now we make it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And lastly, the General, how would you like us to address you, sir?
I think it'd be great if everybody called me Mark in this forum, and great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm currently the chairman at the National Aerospace Research and Technology Park here in Southern New Jersey, and we're an innovation ecosystem for niche technologies in aviation and aerospace. Working closely with the FAA and their technical center at Atlantic City, as well as other DOW and corporate entities who want to develop these technologies. Right now, we're focusing on AAM and other UAS technologies. My background is I'm a retired two-star general in the Air Force. I spent 31 years wearing the uniform, mostly in operations, training, and planning. And I'm currently a 787 captain at American Airlines, so I'm very interested in the topics about collision avoidance that we're going to talk about today. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you. So let's jump right into it. Let's start with article number 1. And Mike, you're going to kick this off. And basically what we want to hear about is why you think it was important that this article even get written in the first place, and what from this article do you think are the most important takeaways for the rest of us? So why don't you go ahead and get started, Mike, with your article.
So thank you, Michelle. I could take an entire hour and beyond talking about this topic. It's published on 18 May of this year. The author did an excellent job. The title was 55 billion for autonomous warfare, game changer or expensive gamble. And so first off, that hits me as expensive gamble, but we're all watching what's going on in the Ukraine and the Middle East as I find it fascinating what drones have done. And as a warfighter, I find it concerning if we don't get on board and get moving. So the first part that stuck out to me was $55 billion for SOCOM, Defense Autonomous Working Group, which is really responsible for rapidly developing and deploying autonomous systems to enhance our warfighting capabilities. And that stuck out to me because this fiscal year, that same group received $225 million. So what's proposed for next year is an increase of 24,000%. And that to me was a wow. If nothing gets catches your eyes, that one alone should. So as you read through the article, the things that you must ask, and on the dollar side is can industry scale? Can we really, as partnering with the Department of War and industry, scale and they actually meet the objectives? And then when you think about the operations side, I already talked a little bit about Ukraine and what's going on in the Middle East, but it's clear to me that the Pentagon, like the article talks about, is all in or has to be all in just from the funding. And we know that these cheap $10,000 to $50,000 drones are defeating air defense systems like the Russian S-400. And when we defend against them, we're shooting Standard missiles and Patriot missiles, and that's not sustainable from any direction, whether it's the cost of it or getting them through the production line and building them. So the article really frames up 4 really unresolved questions when it comes to this, and I'm just going to read them. And it's, will doctrine keep pace with hardware procurement? That's one. And the next one was, will organizational change follow the buying and, the training, those types of things? And I'll share with you, like the general and others, we've seen America's sons and daughters, the men and women that wear the nation's cloth. They're capable, they're fast, they're smarter than ever before. So although that's a question, I'm often not too concerned about our young men and women. Will battlefield feedback loops be built and provide timely feedback? That's a question. And then the number one for me is, I'm in the supply chain all the time, is can the industry base actually keep up? So that kind of frames up, you've got a budget side, you've got an operations side, you've got some questions that we've got to answer between the Department of War and Industry, and you got a whole lot of money. And if we don't get all these stars aligned, then the money could be for naught. And we've seen some Department of War programs in the past not be so successful, but have a lot of money. So we've got a lot of work to do, and I really like the way the article, short article, pointed all that out. Back over to you.
Yeah, it's such a problem, and it's across the board. My concern is very much in that same space, is if we don't increase our industrial base in a smart, deliberate way, are we actually producing, are we manufacturing the right things at the right time for the right people? Let me toss this over to Tom real quick. Technology wise, what's the pragmatism of being able to meet that supply chain need from the technology side?
Honestly, from a technology side, I don't think there's any issues. I think the concern is the investment, right? And the demand signals. So in the past, right, what we're trying to shy away from is large programs of records where the government's tied to somebody and it takes forever to deliver capability. But at the same time, swinging too far the other way and expecting industry to just self-invest in capacity to be able to produce these, produce the technology, produce the drones, et cetera, without signaling what exactly that demand is, that's a challenge, right? Because, hey, I'm in a small business. I've got a board of directors I've got to go to. Regardless of how exciting I think something is, I've got to show them numbers that say, here's the market and here's the evidence that that market is there and that I have a right to play in that market. And I think that's absolutely doable without falling back to the old school long-term procurement, defense procurement or Department of War procurement programs of records, but it's got to be industry and DOW working together. So Michelle, I don't think it's a technology gap at all, but I think there's a capacity and an investment gap that we can overcome, but we have to act differently than we have in the past.
Yeah, agree 100%. I'll circle back to what Mike said about the feedback loop coming back from boots on the ground and balancing that with getting the requirements to industry. That's a tricky place. And then there's this other part of doing the necessary due diligence in the research side. And how do you marry all of those things together in order to align with the right funding mechanisms in the time that we need it done? So, Mark, that's an easy question. I'll just throw it right over to you.
Yeah, thanks for the easy one. I'll just start off saying that my review of this article kind of went right back to the title of it, and it's asking a question: which do you think it is, game changer or expensive gamble? I think it's an easy answer that it's an expensive gamble, but that's a good thing because we need to have risk in our budget so that we can make the strides with industry and within the DOW to acquire and field the capabilities that our country needs. So I think this is a great news, and it's exciting. The 4 questions that Mike posed, kind of as a capstone of his summary of the article, were about: are we going to do the doctrine? Are we going to do the organizational change? Are we going to get feedback loops? And are we going to have the industrial base build up on its own? And I think we could all be realistic and say the answer is not sufficiently to all 4 of those, but it'll give us something to work toward. And those are the things we're going to work toward. We've never, all of those things are challenges. I'll focus on one that I'm interested in, which is the feedback loops. Obviously, within our defense structure, we need, once we get those items through the test program, through the operational test and evaluation, and through the safety case analysis, so that they can be fielded and tested in the operational environment, then we have to have the command and control to actually utilize them in the field and in combat as the nation requires. And that is what we call, what we're all familiar with as C4I, kind of a dated term now, but really getting that intelligence to the automated systems through the warfighter decision matrix is going to be a real challenge. And that's something that I worked on a lot of years in the military, and I know it'll be a challenge to do this. But the good news is, as Tom mentioned, demand signal. This 55 billion is a big demand signal. Even if all of it doesn't get appropriated by Congress in this cycle, the administration and the DOW have signaled we want this out there in the field, and that's going to get the ball rolling both on the industrial side, which I'd love to talk about the research and tech part, but also more so within the, if you will, some of the stilted programs and procedures that we have within the acquisition field.
Yeah, and I think that's what worries me the most, actually, is those pathways between operationalizing research, having to do the due diligence in the research. It's a necessity, and we can't just discount it because it takes a while. And that bridge into learning by doing and being able to apply the financial decision making that makes sense in order to do both things in a way that's meaningful, to actually get the technology out to the warfighter and then be able to absorb that feedback loop in a meaningful way. And I'm still worried about that part. I haven't seen yet where we have a nice cycle that we can, put into a policy yet that works without too many layers. Do you have any thoughts on where we might focus some of that 55 million on being able to bring more efficiencies into that piece of the process, especially given your background in research and tech?
Well, for me, I think that we are entering somewhat of a new phase in the realization across industry and the acquisition and procurement frameworks that we need to speed up the process. And we have a lot more mavericks, a lot more forward thinkers in the business now, and that's all great news. So some of that funding is going to need to go to risk tolerant startups and organizations that have not firmly directed or scripted end goals. And that's something new for us in the DoD acquisition world, as everybody knows. So I'm excited to see that happening. We've got some great things going on in this autonomous aviation and aerospace right now sphere that that we're working with over at NARTP. And I really think that there's a case to be made that if a large portion of this gets appropriated, there's going to be the ability to spread it, not thinly, it's not going to be a peanut butter spread, but it's going to be focused efforts on the technologies and the small businesses like the one that Tom runs, to bring those technologies to fruition so that the warfighter can get that feedback loop going. And then the processes that we have, you kind of mentioned this, Michelle, is things like defense readiness reporting and joint lessons learned systems and other kind of, legacy systems that will need to be updated to be able to field these new technologies rapidly.
Yeah, agreed. Mike and Tom, any other closing comments before we move on to the next article?
Yeah, I just want to throw in, I think there's some, I've seen programs evolving that help break out of the traditional, the procurement cycle of DOW. I mean, we just won a contract that was lightning fast, and it's been like 2.5, 3 years, right? But that was lightning fast. So the whole requirements generation and approval, by the time requirements are approved and flow down to industry and proposals are put out, those requirements are last year's requirements, right? But some things like the Army's UAS marketplace and other things and the Blue UAS list and stuff like that, areas where people can put their technologies, make them available to the warfighter, and then fail fast. I think those are very promising ways that we can get to where we want to be in certain technologies.
Yeah, I love that. That is very similar to the FAA's learning by doing philosophy. We need more of it. Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
No, I think the Department of War gets it in this area. They understand that being agile and speed is key, and that we can't get bogged down in traditional FAR and DFAR acquisition processes. I believe the Department of War understands that in this area, in fact, when you got a boots on the ground warfighter, it's all about getting the right information, the right capability at the right time to that warfighter, so that they can, one of my colleagues on here talked about getting paid to kill and break their stuff, and boots on ground means that you have to have that capability. So I'm feeling pretty good about this, and as we move forward.
Great choice on article, Mike. Really, really appreciate you bringing that one to the discussion today. Okay, so speaking of getting the right technologies to the right people at the right time, why don't we shift over to article number 2 and collision avoidance. Tom, you want to take this one away?
Sure. Well, the article, Michelle, that I brought forward was really, it was around a mid-air collision that occurred over Reagan Airport between an Army Black Hawk helicopter and an American Airlines aircraft that killed 67 people. Pretty avoidable. But the reason I brought it forward wasn't just because of that specific instance. I do have some interest in that interest. We do work with the Army, and we have technology in ACAS-X that'll help. And the article describes the evolution of collision avoidance systems. But it's really, if you think about that, where there's airlines flying published routes and there's aircrew training in published routes in an airspace that they're all familiar with, and we have a mid-air collision. What happens when and as we do continue to add new entrants into the airspace with beyond line of sight drones and with UAM and AAM, et cetera, it's just going to get worse. So we have to focus on the technologies that can help fix that. And that's why this article talks about TCAS, Traffic Collision Avoidance System, from decades ago that helped a lot of airspace safety improvements, right? But TCAS has its own warts and challenges, particularly at low altitude, where it inhibits collision around dense terminal areas. It inhibits collision alerting, so right in areas where you maybe most need it. For years, MIT, Lincoln Labs, and Johns Hopkins University have been working on ACAS-X, which is a family of systems. So if you look at TCAS partially successful, but not being able to cover the whole marketplace, TCAS is really relevant for large transport aircraft. ACAS is a family of algorithms that are relevant for all different types of aircraft. So ACAS XA and XO are for your traditional transport aircraft, and those have been released as TSOs. ACAS XU is for large fixed-wing unmanned aircraft or uncrewed aircraft. There's a relevant TSO released for that now. ACAS XR is for all rotorcraft, manned and unmanned. They're working on hopefully finalizing the MOPS, the minimum operational performance spec, by this year. And then there's even one for small drones, which is passive, ACAS SXU, right? So for me, what's important about that is now most aircraft in airspace that are cooperative, that are using these similar systems, can avoid each other predictably, right? Because for me, a challenge with non-cooperative aircraft or aircraft that aren't communicating with each other is if we're both heading towards each other and this person says, hey, I'm going to turn right and climb, and this one says, I'm going to turn left and climb, you're still going to collide, right? So unless you can coordinate that in some type of standard system, and I think ACAS X as a family is a standard system that can help with that. We're still going to have challenges in airspace if we don't do that. So that's what this article was kind of all about, both stemming from the collision that occurred over DC and then the technologies and how it evolved.
Yeah, so I've been around for a minute and have been part of the early discussions of transitioning TCAS to ACAS, and I'm a big fan. I think that this is one of those important layers for our situational awareness and being able to buy down risk as we continue to introduce new platforms into the system. We only have one national airspace system, right? We have one NAS. So being able to have that situational awareness in a meaningful way for all operators is critical. And having some level of collision avoidance intelligence, in my mind, rates right up there. So this is a great article for you to bring. So let me open it up to the other guests. Mark, what is your take on collision avoidance? I think you mentioned earlier you were excited to get into this topic. What do you think?
Well, it is exciting. It's obviously an area of interest for me, and I'm a big fan of advancing the technologies on collision avoidance. And TCAS is and has been a great tool for, as Tom mentioned, mostly transport category aircraft operating in the NAS and outside the NAS. And I've used it most of my career. But it's time for an upgrade, an update, and the technologies, as you mentioned, Michelle, have been around for a little while to add on. So I really like the way Tom described it as a multi-layer capability that has different applications for different types of aircraft and different environments, right? Like the one that he used as an example, the crash we had over the Potomac was a kind of a unique set of circumstances at low altitude, where TCAS is limited because obviously it can't direct either airplane to descend when they're only 400 to 700 feet above the ground. Right. But there's I would just throw out that there's a lot of other things that contributed to this accident and normally do, because any aviation accident is a chain of events that follow one mistake. And usually there have to be several errors uncorrected in order to cause something terrible like this to happen. And in this case, there was a training and experience factor in both aircraft, in my opinion. And I'll leave it at that, because as we all know, we don't really want to second guess too much when we're on camera, because people will take a soundbite and say that was the reason for this crash. And there's a lot of reasons for any accident. But this one was not just because we didn't have the right technology on board. Although, would it have helped or lessened the risk? Absolutely, if there was additional technology like ACAS X. So I'm a big fan of this, and I appreciate Tom for bringing it to light in this forum.
Absolutely. Over to you, Mike. Any thoughts?
I think we're all a big fan of this because we all fly on airplanes. So we really want to make sure that the systems out there work. And I know the guy that's sitting in the front wants to make sure that we get delivered safely. From a Department of War perspective, I think about, this and how does it apply there? I've been Red Crown in a saturated environment, and I reflect back on the last article with drones. What happens when there's a drone swarm? Does this technology step in and help us? What happens when we're in an area that we're not allowed to communicate with each other, or we're in an area that's denying us GPS coverage, or jamming our communications? So I think about this a little bit differently. I probably have more questions than I do have answers for you. Back to you.
Yeah. So I was talking with a friend of mine, fellow aircraft dispatcher. I was a dispatcher for about a decade. And when people ask what we do, it's like, well, I do these 27 things and I can lay them out in a list. However, there are 5,000 nuances that impact and influence those 27 things. And it's really hard to be able to characterize all of the things that could go wrong in any kind of operational environment. Our operational environment in the NAS is extremely dynamic. And we put as much predictability into the system as we can realistically do in order to have some level of confidence in the safety and efficiency of the operating environment. Adding collision avoidance to the sector that is flying blind right now is probably one of the most important things we can be doing for our low altitude operating environment.
Hey,
So,
Michelle.
yeah,
I'm sorry, can I jump in? One thing I didn't
absolutely.
mention early, but it is in the article, right? And that is so collision avoidance takes ADS-B and other signals, right? As I think you know, but for our audience, right? And then it fuses together traffic from a bunch of different sources in a surveillance tracking module, and then it determines whether there's a risk of collision in this threat resolution module, and it says, okay, there is, so therefore it gives guidance to the aircraft on what to do. TCAS and ACAS work similarly in that there's differences behind it, and then there's differences in the way ACAS will present a collision avoidance maneuver. It could be horizontal or vertical. But what's also described in the article, which is, I think, one of the things where the FAA can help itself, right? I mean, ACAS is a challenge to roll out and to make sure you get it right, et cetera, right? But ADS-B out has been mandated for many years now in most places in the national airspace, so aircraft transmitting their own positions. But ADS-B in has not been required anywhere. And I think that's just kind of a crying shame. Because as the general Mark pointed out, right, when you're flying, there's no one thing that necessarily will prevent anything, but different layers of safety from visual, from your co-pilot, from radar, from ADS-B in to let you know there's traffic there to hopefully present that solution. So things like the Rotor Act that passed the Senate, the Alert Act that passed the House, maybe they'll come up with something in between that passes both, right? I think those things requiring ADS-B receivers, ADS-B in on aircraft is a really good thing, and it's a very low threat from a technology perspective.
Yeah, for sure. Any closing comments from the other guests on this article? So thank you, Tom.
Sure.
Again, I can't emphasize this one enough. Having been around for 1,000 years, I feel like this is one of the most important things we can do for our industry right now. So, talking about the dynamics of decision making, why don't we shift over to article number 3, and let's put a slightly different lens on dynamic decision making. Mark, do you want to cue up your article?
Sure, I'll just take a couple minutes and looking forward to the discussion, but this is a little bit of a shift away from the purely technical, and it really goes to the question of what are our priorities as a nation when it comes to American defense policy and by extension foreign policy. And so if you'll bear with me, all of us had to sit through International Affairs 101 at one point or another, but let's just step back and look at the big picture of what is the discussion inside the Beltway for the past 10 or 15 years about where our resources should be focused and what kind of technologies especially should we be developing to meet the needs of that priority theater, if you will. And the article that I pointed out that I brought for the discussion was really about this idea that we've been pivoting to Asia for some time now. And is it working? Is it paying off? Is it realistic? And the author would probably be described by most people who've worked or known him as an Atlanticist or, a European specialist. So it's no surprise to say that he favors the U.S. Maintaining and even building on our European allies and our dedication and commitment to security in the Atlantic and on the European continent, including the support to Ukraine for a variety of reasons. So I think it's something to discuss. I'm really looking forward to hearing what Mike and Tom and you think about this. He says in the article some things that make it sound like he thinks it's a fool's errand to be devoting resources to the Pacific. That's not really where the article is going, and that's not the gist of the article. And if you want to dispute that, I'm on board with you, because it's not. He's really talking about balancing the needs, and one way to do that is greater defense expenditures so that we can prepare to deter in more than one theater at a time. And that's a realistic discussion that I think is good to advertise at this point in our history. As we know, the administration just forwarded the largest defense budget proposal ever to Congress, 1.5 trillion approximately. And a lot of people will say, well, that'll never get through Congress. Well, even if it's not 1.5 trillion in the end, it's probably going to be the biggest defense budget ever. And that might be a good thing for America and the future of both theaters. So looking forward to hearing what you all have to say about it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're in a world now where you can't just assume that your disagreement with one is only with one, right? There is a need for us to be prepared on multiple fronts. And we're finding out that being prepared in this new world of drone technology is a whole different ballgame. So let me pass over to Mike and Tom. Thoughts about this topic, this article?
Yeah, I think policy and strategy has to be aligned. As I read the article, though, it made me think about the Forward Strike Group and how complex that deployment was for them as they moved from UCOM to CENTCOM, all the way over to SOUTHCOM to conduct, combat operations and beyond. And so, I think the ramp up to the Indo-PACOM and the Pacific has delivered us some good things. But the bottom line is that we are a global military and not just a theater specific military, even though some of our defense policy or policy may direct us into one or two regional conflicts, old terms, you hear some old language there. We're at a point we're going to have to move globally because we just don't know what the threat is going to be tomorrow or necessarily where it's going to be, especially sitting on this side of the fence. I think when I was sitting on the other side of the fence, I might have a different opinion, but that's just to kick off this discussion.
Michelle, one thing that strikes me is just when people sort of say, hey, choosing Asia over Europe and things like that, right? I mean, and I think I haven't been as senior a level in the military as Mark and Mike, you may have been, so I'm not aware of how and where those policies are made. But I would imagine nobody has ever said we're gonna fight China instead of fighting over Europe or fighting something out east, right? To me, we have friends and allies around the world. We have two major coasts, the east and the west, and we have enemies that can approach us from either direction, right? And I'm sure the Department of War, I'm guessing, has never thought that there was just one direction that they need to look, nor one direction that they need to invest. And really, it comes down to developing technologies, really, and strategies, right? Because a land war in Europe is very different than fighting anything over in the Asia Pacific over the sea, right? And kind of like in World War II, where we had to do both things things very, very well over in the South Pacific and then over in Europe. We need to continue to equip and invest and train in order to be able to do all of those things to best defend ourselves and our allies. So it's not an either or. It's both.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more with Tom. And I think that's the general gist of the article, which we all seem to agree with. But, you know, I in my experience, I have sat in meetings at the Joint Staff with the people who are writing the national security strategy, and they were tasked with making a priority list. And sometimes that's very difficult to do. And it wasn't just saying to the country, here's our strategy, just do all things well, because that's not realistic. And we do have limited resources. And different administrations are going to emphasize the limitations on those resources more than others. But when they had to prioritize over the past 15 years, they've mostly leaned toward the Pacific as the true emerging threat. There was a time where we said the threat in Europe posed by Russia, this was pre-Ukraine, that was a short-term threat because of the regime there see it as not a long-term threat. But the real pacing threat for the medium and long term is in the Pacific, and that's China. And most strategists would probably say that still holds true. But I think it's important with the new technologies that you are all involved in and that this podcast really focuses on, to realize that, as Michelle said, and I think you alluded to as well, Tom, we need to be able to bridge the strategies with the new technologies applying to as many of those regions, as Mike mentioned, or applications or threats. And that's going to be a challenge, because just doing, for instance, automated logistics through UAS capabilities is very, very different in those two theaters. If we're talking about island hopping, where I need aircraft parts 150 miles, 350 miles forward, what kind of technology do I need, versus what am I going to be operating, let's say, on the eastern flank of NATO in the case of a ground incursion into NATO territory. Very different threats and very different technologies required, as I see it. And again, my pet peeve, or if you will, my pet project, is command and control, training and establishing for that need to command and control and understand the capabilities that this new technology brings will be a true challenge, even once industry has delivered these. And hopefully with this increased defense budget, industry will have the chance to deliver on a balanced strategy capability.
So being able to have a level of readiness for each component and the various missions inside each component, we know is a challenge. The levels of readiness are not even, right? And it shows. We have the same kind of challenge on the technology side, where we have a lot of very mature technology, and we have some tech that's not quite there yet, but we need to get it out to the warfighter because we have to learn by doing. So I'm seeing kind of an imbalance in how we orchestrate those priorities that have to happen, that have to be made, because like you said, we only have limited resources, and the pragmatics of getting meaningful capability like across the board. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter what theater is hot. We have to, because of this, the world that we live in now, we have to have at least some level of readiness across the board. I'm not seeing that really happening. It's in pockets, right?
Very true, Michelle. And I'll just briefly say that one of the reasons that I'm an advocate for a more balanced strategy is because of the realistic expectation that meeting those needs right now for deterrence in the Pacific theater is very, very difficult based on the capabilities we have. And as the article mentions, we've taken a big hit by expending our munitions in this Iran war. That was a choice we made, and it's going to incur a cost of development over the medium term, and I'm talking 5 to 10 years minimum, to replenish those stocks and to meet the needs. And I will say, as a warfighter and a planner, that these challenges have been in existence for a long time. It's not just that we had everything stocked to the brim and we were ready to go 100% of our plans every day. No, that wasn't the case, and it's certainly not the case today. So your point about meeting those needs with new technologies and even current technologies is well taken. And if there's anything that that I see as a solution to this, it's a mindset shift that our nation needs to take. And this article is kind of inching us towards that perhaps higher overall expenditures to meet the technological needs for our warfighter is a reasonable price to pay for the security of our future. And I'm sorry to talk so long. Over to you, Mike.
Yeah, you're right on spot, and just the thoughts that I have in addition to that near and midterm is also the maintenance and ability to repair. And we're flying the wings off those jets. We're deploying those ships for some of the longest deployments we've seen in our history. And not only do they require upgrades and to stay up with technology, but they also require extensive maintenance. So that's another topic, certainly for another show, but that's on my mind as well. Back over to you.
All right, Tom.
I don't have really anything further on this. I think Mark and Mike both said it well. I think we have allies around the world. I mean, one thing I will point out, living in my own little world of IFF and collision avoidance and stuff like that, and that's standards. IFF is a NATO standard, but yet we do share it with some allies that are outside of NATO, and I think that's the kind of thinking that we need to continue to have. It's not just NATO or others. It's us and our allies, because who's going to help us in the Pacific? There's going to be some assistance from somebody who's not in the Pacific themselves. So as we look at standardization across our allied forces, we need to consider not just NATO.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and that brings to mind a key word in the future of our planning, and that's interoperability. Is what Tom was referring to, and of course, it's not just with NATO standard systems, but with weapons deployment, command and control, and even things like what kind of rail gauge do you have in your country? Because we're going to need logistics to get those forces to the front. And if the rail gauge is different from one country to the next, it could create a big problem, which is obviously something that we've been working on. But excellent point from Tom there. What else do you want us to talk about, Michelle? Anything else on your mind?
Well, I think that this entire conversation today has been invaluable for me. We talked about the abundance of funding. We've talked about the availability of the technologies, and we've talked about the reason to be more deliberate about the level of readiness across the board, regardless of what theater we're talking about. So I'd like for us to kind of step back a minute and think about this holistically. What would be some, if you were in charge for the day, how would you, what recommendations would you make right now today in order to ensure that thread that we just pulled today from, we have this funding, we've got the tech, we've got multiple fronts that we need to have a certain level of readiness for, what's the very next step that you would recommend happen? And I don't care if it's on the government side, if it's on the tech side. What do you think is the smallest executable step that has to happen right now? And Mike, I'll start over there with you.
Oh, that's a tough one. I could go on for hours, but with all that sounds like a perfect storm to me in many ways. But it's the policy, it's the operational planning, it's the training, it's the workforce. And when I separate the workforce from those in uniform, but it's that entire ecosystem that you have to bring together, and we need to do that very quickly so that we're ready. So like I said, I could spend a lot of time on this and break down each one of them. But if I had to focus on one, it's hard to do. because I'd be talking to you about, let's get the workforce ready so they can scale right now. Let's get manufacturing ready so that they can scale right now. It's a common MBA problem that everybody studies when they go get that that graduate education. So very complex. Sorry, I can't give you one answer. Maybe Mark or Tom can, but that's what I got. I'll kick it over to them.
Well, before we go, why don't you give us a little bit more? We've got time. Let's talk a little bit more about what that means. So you made a comment that you separate the workforce from the folks in uniform. So what does it mean to address a level of readiness for that workforce? In your mind, what does that mean?
So, we see this today in submarine construction. We just, haven't focused on those trade jobs, the welders and the pipe fitters and the electricians. And, we focus more on getting a college degree that doesn't really mean you can roll up your sleeves and get dirty and produce something. And so what that means for me, and quite frankly, I'm not sure, we've got to have time, but it takes a long time to do this. But we've got to focus on some of those basic but difficult tasks of those types of skill sets and getting them in place so that we can build a drone. It takes some of those skill sets to build drones and autonomous vehicles as well, above the water and below the water. So I really think that we've got to get a good handle on this workforce training and education piece to get in the facilities to produce these capabilities for the warfighter so they can take them on the battlefield and win the fight.
Mark, how does that tie into the tech parks and the need to have, logistics be all on the same page across theaters?
Well, Mike identified something that we work on pretty steadily at NARTP, and there's a lot of other nonprofit entities out there that are working on workforce development. And that means, are we building STEM programs in the high schools? Are we building training programs in the trades, as Mike mentioned, so that we'll have that workforce in the 5 to 10 year out years? And we're making progress on that locally, regionally, and otherwise. But I think a greater national emphasis on that would be more than welcome. And that does take money. So I'll answer your question that you posed earlier. What's the one thing I would do? Is I would emphasize a mindset shift. And this is me working at the DOW in some capacity. Let's shift the mindset to be more risk tolerant and more ready to make things happen on the short term through our tech partners, our business partners. And when I say our tech partners, I'm talking about entities that might be nonprofits, they might be something else. They're kind of the middleman. They can also be the trusted agent for government when these expenditures are going out to the field, because there's nothing wrong with budgeting money and then contracting a small, medium, or large company to build that capability for our nation. That's what we do. But sometimes we have to look at a middleman, because the system that we have is going to maybe induce the wrong outcome if we don't have that. So identifying those entities like the NARTP that are developing workforces, that are also engaging innovators and working to bring together an ecosystem to get results, along with the government agency that's interested. Those are risks that government has to learn to take a little bit more, in my opinion.
Do you think that we have less of an inclination to focus on those readiness levels when we don't have hot spots to motivate us? Because it feels like we all of a sudden remember that these things are important when we are in a position where we need them now.
Yeah, that's the normal perspective, from our point of view here. But I'll tell you that if you're a joint staff planner, you're planning for the readiness levels that we're going to need in 2, 4, 6 years. Every day you go to work, and it's on your mind, and it's something high on the priority list for your boss and your boss's boss. So that's what's going on at the Pentagon. I'm very sure of it. They're thinking long-term, medium-term, and what our needs are. And they're especially looking, as you mentioned, you use that word readiness, which is a word near and dear to my heart, Michelle, because readiness levels are something that we measure to the nth degree, but we don't always have the right tools to measure it, especially when we're talking about future systems and future technologies. So this is exciting stuff, and I think it's going to change the way that these new technologies are absolutely going to change the way that we plan our capabilities for the nation's defense in the future.
Absolutely. So let's shift a little bit from the human readiness over to the technology readiness. Tom, we know that we've got a lot of tech out there that's really good and it's ready to go. However, as you're growing SageTech, for example, you're looking to onboard people that can hit the ground running. Are you finding that you're able to do that without a lot of OJT, or is there a level of readiness that you would wish would be available to you as you onboard folks?
Honestly, I'll probably give you the surprising answer. We feel pretty good about it. And I think part of that just has to do with luck, right? The building that I'm sitting in, the office furniture that I'm here, this was the former headquarters of a company called In Situ, which was one of the leaders in UAS and in Department of War Tech. So where I live is an ecosystem built from the 1990s with In Situ. So the workforce around here is very well geared towards the types of things that we all do. So I won't say that we have them, banging down our doors for roles here, but when we do find people, when we do bring in people locally, they generally do have the skill set. That being said, I think it's our job in industry to participate in helping build this workforce. So even out here, I participate with the community college on an advisory committee, and there's local economic development board that we sit on. We're talking about the workforce of the future. Healthcare needs different things in the workforce in the future. Manufacturing and technology all need different things, but bringing industry together with academia to help them understand what kind of curricula they need to create, I think is super important.
So you just hit on something that's really important for me. So like if I were queen for a day, I would say, Tom and Mark, go in a room, shut the door, shove pizza underneath it, and figure out how we bring the industry technology into these industrial parks who we're counting on to accelerate and kind of seed our manufacturing growth. I mean, these are the kinds of things that we need to do in order to build that holistic level of readiness across the board.
Yeah, and I'll put in my request now for pepperoni over there. But there's a lot of people that I can think of that have that expertise. I'm probably not one of them when it comes to workforce development. But as Tom mentioned, we're doing similar things in southern New Jersey and in the Northeast in general, working with our academic and our corporate partners. And I think there's a lot of exciting stuff going on there. Mike is very familiar with some of the things that are going on, and there are nonprofits out there that are actively helping to induce young people to get into the trades that are going to be needed. And somebody told me, we're going to need welders to build submarines for the next 20 years. If you know a young person, get them into welding school. And that sounds like a great idea to me, but of course there's more to it than that. And I look forward to seeing advances from this and seeing the fruits of our labor come to fruition, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, just on this call today, we have Tom bringing us the what, we have Mark bringing us the why, and we have Mike bringing us the where. So we need to get better at having these kinds of conversations, bringing that diversity of thought into front and center, so that we can holistically get to that level of readiness that we all need, whether it's for the workforce, whether it's for the soldier, whether it's for the technology, or whether it's for the policy development. There's a different definition. I spent an entire year on words matter articles because we talk past each other so often, but we could define readiness in a million different ways, and they're probably mostly all valid. Okay, um, we are at about the end of our time here. This has been an amazing conversation that I would have loved to have continued well into the afternoon. But since we can't, before we go, why don't each of you tell the viewers how they can get a hold of you? Mark?
Okay, I'll
Well,
start.
go ahead. Go
Sorry,
ahead.
sorry, Mike. Yeah, I'll just quickly say that at the National Aerospace Research and Technology Park, we're working on building a innovation ecosystem for new and emerging aviation and aerospace technologies. Closely partnered with the FAA Tech Center there at Atlantic City International Airport, and we can be reached at nartp.com. Have a look. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Mike.
All right, an easy one here. At Carahsoft, we interact with about 1,500 manufacturers every day, and hundreds and hundreds of integration partners. We have an excellent website. It's Carahsoft, CARAHSOFT.com. If you want to reach me, go on that website, ask that question, and I'll get back to you, or somebody that aligns to whatever question you're asking. But hey, thank you very much. And this is a wonderful session. I wish we could just keep going.
Excellent. Me too. Thank you. All right, Tom, how do we find you?
Okay. Sure. Find me, SageTech, SAGETECH.com. And then if you want to reach me directly, my email is tom.fury, that's my name, @sagetech.com. And then since we're wrapping up, Michelle, I'll just say thanks. And Mark and Mike, it was great to get to know you virtually here, and I really appreciated learning from you guys today. It's been a joy.
Thanks for the time, and really appreciate the participation by all three of you. Great job, Michelle.
All right, thank you so much. All right, before we go, once again, we have to thank the people who make these sessions possible. So always powered by LiveView. Thank you, Carahsoft, Cape May County, Victus Technologies, and Echodyne. And the next full crew show is going to be on July 23rd at 11 a.m. on tech policy. And I understand it's going to be very lawyer heavy, so buckle up for that one. And on behalf of our full crew and our exquisite guest from today, we are out here.